All rules broken, no regrets, just one bite of spaghetti. That's what she ate. My leftover spaghetti. And now an alien girl was wrapped in my blanket, sweating through her bones, refusing to speak, refusing to move, like my bed had become her last place to survive. I knelt beside her, my heart hammering against my ribs. In the dim glow of my bedside lamp, her skin looked almost translucent, the network of veins beneath pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. The usual soft luminescence that all astrons carried beneath their skin, like bioluminescent jellyfish from Earth's oceans, had dimmed to barely a flicker. "Lyra," I whispered, afraid even my voice might shatter her. "I need to call medical." Her fingers shot out from beneath the blanket, wrapping around my wrist with surprising strength. "No," she rasped, her silver eyes wide with panic. "Cannot let others know. Protocol violation." I ran my free hand through my hair, conflicted. Astrons weren't supposed to consume Earth food. Everyone knew that. Their digestive systems evolved for the mineral-rich vegetation of their homeworld, couldn't process our proteins. It wasn't just a recommendation, it was a strict rule of the planetary exchange program. "You could die," I argued, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear coiling in my stomach. A weak smile flickered across her face, and even in her pain, it transformed her features in that distinctly alien way that still caught me off guard. "Not fatal, just purging." My apartment hummed with the constant background noise of Outpost 37, the recycled air rushing through vents, the distant rumble of the station's massive generators, the occasional ping of messages being delivered to terminals throughout the complex. Ordinary sounds that felt surreal against the extraordinary situation unfolding on my bedroom floor. I glanced at my communication terminal, weighing my options. Calling medical would mean reporting her. Reporting her could mean ending her assignment here, sending her back to Astra ahead of schedule. I'd read enough about the competitive nature of their exchange program to know that a protocol breach this significant would be considered a failure. "How do I help you?" I asked finally, making my decision. "What do Astrons do when this happens?" Her eyes, those mesmerizing silver orbs with pupils that contracted vertically like a cat's, studied my face. "Stay," she whispered. "Just stay." I helped her onto my bed, a simple platform with a memory foam mattress that automatically adjusted to body temperature and weight. It was standard station-issue furniture, nothing special, but Lyra had always been fascinated by it. Now she curled into it like it was the only safe harbor in a storm. As I tucked the blanket around her shivering form, I found myself wondering how I'd ended up here. A Level 2 maintenance technician harboring a sick alien diplomat in my personal quarters, breaking at least 4 station protocols in the process. But then, nothing about my interactions with Lyra had ever followed protocol. From the first day she wandered into my life, she'd been the exception to every rule I thought I understood. Outside my small window, the eternal night of deep space stretched endlessly, pinpricked with distant stars. The massive ringed gas giant we orbited cast a faint blue glow through the reinforced glass. Another ordinary night on Outpost 37, where representatives from 17 planetary systems worked toward what our leaders called harmonious galactic cooperation. I settled onto the floor beside the bed, back against the wall, watching the rise and fall of Lyra's chest beneath my blanket. Her breathing was still too shallow, too quick, but she was fighting. And somehow I knew I'd spend the entire night right here, counting those breaths, as if my vigilance alone could ensure they continued. "Why?" I asked softly, not expecting an answer from her semi-conscious form. "Why did you eat it, Lyra?" Her eyes remained closed, but her lips moved slightly. I leaned closer, barely catching her whispered response. "To understand you." Something shifted in my chest, a tightening that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the weight of her words. In that moment, looking at her curled in my bed, I realized that whatever was happening between us had already gone far beyond the carefully regulated interactions prescribed by the exchange program, and there was no protocol for what would come next. 12 hours earlier, she had been fine, curious, bright-eyed, distant, but watching everything. Her name was Lyra, one of the non-combat members of the planetary exchange, half diplomat, half observer, mostly ignored. She was assigned to our station for cultural research. I was just the guy who fixed faulty lighting and managed heat vents. We weren't supposed to interact much, but somehow she ended up in my apartment almost every evening, silent, walking barefoot, fascinated by fans, coffee mugs, cardboard, condensation on glass. The first time I met Lyra was 3 weeks ago, crawling through a maintenance shaft on level 4, sweat dripping down my back as I recalibrated an overheating ventilation fan. The station had been going through one of its periodic thermal regulation issues. Nothing serious, just annoying temperature fluctuations that prompted dozens of complaint tickets. I was so focused on the fan circuitry that I didn't notice her until I backed out of the shaft and nearly collided with her. She stood perfectly still, watching me with that unblinking silver gaze. "Jesus!" I gasped, dropping my multi-tool. "How long have you been standing there?" 17 minutes, she replied, her voice melodic with that distinctive Astran accent, like wind chimes made of words. "Your work is very precise." I picked up my tool, momentarily flustered by her directness. We'd been briefed about the Astran delegation, of course. Everyone on the station had received the standard cultural sensitivity training, but nothing in those dry presentations had prepared me for the disorienting experience of having one of them study me like I was a particularly fascinating science experiment. "Just doing my job," I said, closing the maintenance panel. "The fan was running hot. Should be fixed now." She tilted her head slightly, the movement too smooth to seem human. "Temperature is important to your species. You maintain it artificially within very narrow parameters." It wasn't a question, but I found myself answering anyway. "Yeah, humans are pretty particular about comfort." "Comfort," she repeated as if testing the word, "a concept your species values highly." I remember feeling oddly self-conscious under her gaze, like I was somehow representing all of humanity in this random hallway conversation. "Don't Astrans care about comfort?" Her luminescent skin pulsed slightly. What I would later learn was their equivalent of a thoughtful expression. "We prioritize functionality, but your question is interesting." She followed me to 3 more repair jobs that day, saying very little, just observing. By the end of my shift, I'd grown accustomed to her quiet presence. When we reached the residential sector, I expected her to head toward the diplomatic quarters on level 2. Instead, she simply continued following me. This is me," I said awkwardly, stopping at my door on level 5. "Maintenance staff quarters." She nodded as if I'd provided crucial information. "May I see inside?" Every protocol manual flashed warning signals in my brain. Diplomatic personnel weren't supposed to enter staff living quarters without official business. There were designated interaction spaces for cultural exchange. But something about her direct, curious gaze made me hesitate. She wasn't asking as a diplomat. She was asking as someone genuinely interested. "Sure," I heard myself say, pressing my palm to the scanner. "It's nothing special, though." The door slid open to reveal my small apartment. Standard issue, sparsely furnished, with the personal touches that accumulated after 4 years on the station. A few physical books on a shelf, a handmade quilt from my mother draped over the couch. A collection of unusual bolts and mechanical parts I'd salvaged from repairs, arranged on a side table. Lyra entered with deliberate steps, her bare feet, Astrans rarely wore footwear indoors, making no sound on the floor. She moved through my living space like someone exploring a museum. Careful, reverent, intensely observant. She stopped at my collection of salvaged parts. "These serve no function," she stated, not critically, but with genuine curiosity. "I just like how they look," I admitted. "The patterns, the textures. Reminds me that even utilitarian things can be beautiful in their own way." She glanced at me, and something flickered across her features. A micro-expression I couldn't interpret. "You find beauty in discarded functionality." The way she said it made it sound profound, though I'd never thought of my junk collection that way. "I guess I do." That first night, she stayed for 23 minutes exactly, asked questions about everything: my shower, Astrans use sonic cleansing; my kitchen, they had communal food preparation; my window, their structures had reactive surfaces rather than transparent ones. She left as abruptly as she'd arrived, with a formal nod and no explanation. I figured it was a one-time curiosity, an Astran diplomat's brief anthropological excursion. But she returned the next evening, and the next, always at the same time, always with that same intense curiosity. Never eating, just watching, asking her strange questions that made me see my own life through alien eyes. She asked strange questions. Why do humans keep things that don't function? Why does your bed always look unmade but feel so clean? What does it mean to miss someone? I didn't always have answers. Sometimes I just handed her things and watched her think about them harder than I ever did. That last question had come just yesterday, as she perched on the edge of my couch, examining a postcard my sister had sent from Earth. Missing someone is... I paused, searching for words. It's feeling their absence, like there's a space they should fill, and when they're not there, you feel the emptiness. She considered this, her skin glowing slightly brighter in the dim evening light. Do all humans experience this sensation? Most of us, yeah. Do you miss Earth? She asked. I leaned back in my chair, surprised by how her question made me feel. Parts of it, certain places, certain people, but not all of it. Would you return if given the opportunity? Probably not permanently, I admitted. I've built a life here. Her gaze moved around my small apartment, taking in the evidence of that life, modest as it was. You have created belonging, she said, and something in her tone made me wonder if that concept had particular significance to Astrans. Looking back on those evenings now, watching her fight through the effects of human food on her system, I realized how little I actually knew about her. For all her questions, she rarely offered information about herself or her world. She was a constant presence that somehow remained a mystery, and now she was suffering because of a plate of spaghetti and an invitation I should never have extended. That night, I made dinner, just for me. She didn't eat Earth food, usually just nibbled on nutrient gel from her ship. But I was joking around and said, "Come on, Lyra. You've been here 3 weeks. Time to earn your Earth badge. Try the spaghetti." She gave me that expression, half curious, half afraid, then picked up the fork and studied it like a sacred artifact. She didn't eat it then, not in front of me. The memory of that evening played through my mind as I sat vigilant beside my bed, watching Lyra's struggle. Had it really been just hours ago? It felt like days. I'd been cooking in my small kitchen unit. Nothing fancy, just rehydrating some preserved pasta and warming up a sauce packet. Standard station fare, dressed up with a few hoarded spices from the last supply ship. Cooking was one of the few creative outlets available to maintenance staff, and I'd developed a reputation for making the bland provisions almost tasty. Lyra had arrived at her usual time, letting herself in without announcement, another of our unspoken routines. She'd taken her customary perch on the high stool beside my kitchen counter, watching the process with her characteristic intensity. The chemical reactions produce complex aromatics, she observed as steam rose from the pot. Is the olfactory component significant to your enjoyment? I smiled, stirring the sauce. Huge part of it. Smell and taste are connected for humans. Half of what we taste is actually what we smell first. Fascinating inefficiency, she murmured, though her tone held no judgment. Multiple sensory systems processing the same input. Makes for a richer experience, I countered, draining the pasta. Like how you can listen to music and also feel the vibrations. It's more complete that way. She considered this as I plated my dinner, adding a sprinkle of dried herbs for garnish, a small luxury that had cost me a week's worth of recreation credits on the black market. You derive joy from this activity, she stated, watching me take my first appreciative bite. Food is more than fuel, I replied between mouthfuls. It's comfort, culture, connection. Connection? She leaned forward slightly, interest piqued. Sure, humans bond over food. Sharing meals is social glue in pretty much every Earth culture. I twirled another forkful of pasta. That's why we have all those diplomatic dinners between delegations. Those are performative rituals, she pointed out. Structured exchanges of predetermined significance? I laughed. Yeah, those formal ones are pretty stiff. Real food connections are more spontaneous, intimate. Something shifted in her expression, a subtle change in the luminescence beneath her skin. Intimate, she repeated as if cataloging the concept. That's when I made my mistake. A casual invitation born of comfort and familiarity. Come on, Lyra. You've been here 3 weeks. Time to earn your Earth badge. Try the spaghetti. I meant it as a joke. Everyone knew Astrans couldn't eat Earth food. Their strictly regulated nutrient intake was famous throughout the station. They consumed precisely calibrated gel formulations that provided exactly what their physiology required, no more and no less. She gave me that expression, half curious, half afraid, then picked up the fork and studied it like a sacred artifact. For a moment, I thought she might actually try it. Her hand hovered over my plate, fork poised. Then she set it down carefully. Your customs are interesting, she said, reverting to the formal tone she used less and less in our private conversations. But incompatible with my biology. I nodded, relieved she'd decline. Just teasing. I know you can't eat our food. The conversation moved on to other topics. The latest diplomatic meetings, a minor incident in the agricultural sector, the upcoming stellar alignment visible from the observation deck. Normal evening banter that felt comfortable in its routine. When I finished eating, I left the plate on the counter, planning to clean up later. Lyra stayed another hour examining a new book I'd received in the last personal package from Earth. As always, she left precisely at station midnight, with her customary nod of acknowledgement. I cleaned the kitchen, showered, and went to bed without giving the spaghetti another thought. Somewhere in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of metal clinking. I walked out of my room and found the plate licked clean. Sauce stains gone, fork dropped, no Lyra. Then I heard a soft thud, found her collapsed beside my bed, face pale, body hot to touch. The sound that had woken me, the dropped fork, replayed in my mind now. Had she been watching me sleep before attempting to eat the spaghetti? The thought sent an unexpected shiver through me. Not fear, but something more complex. "Why didn't you listen?" I whispered, more to myself than to her unconscious form. Her eyelids fluttered, though she didn't fully wake. The soft glow beneath her skin pulsed weakly, irregularly. Whatever battle her body was fighting, it was consuming all her energy. I reached out hesitantly, then gently brushed a strand of her silver-white hair from her face. Up close, the texture was unlike human hair. Finer, almost like spun glass, yet somehow soft. Another reminder of the fundamental differences between us, differences she had tried to bridge with a forkful of forbidden food. The question haunted me as I sat vigil through the remaining hours of the night cycle. What could possibly have made her take such a risk? "Lyra," I said, kneeling beside her, "what the hell? What did you do?" "I wanted to know," she whispered, "what your joy tastes like." Her voice was cracked, dry, and she shivered as she pulled herself up onto the bed, my bed, and wrapped herself tightly in the blanket without asking. "It hurts," she whispered, "but I don't want to move." Dawn cycle began with the gradual brightening of the ambient lighting throughout the station, a simulation of Earth sunrise for the human residents. In my darkened bedroom, the change was subtle, just enough to cast Lyra's suffering features into sharper relief. She hadn't slept. Neither had I. Hour after hour, I'd watched her body fight against the incompatible proteins and compounds it had ingested. Several times, she'd been seized by violent tremors, her back arching as ripples of discomfort visibly moved beneath her luminescent skin. During one particularly bad spell, I'd almost called medical despite her protests. Only the desperate grip of her hand on mine had stopped me. That, and the fear in her silver eyes. As the morning light strengthened, I examined her more carefully. The natural glow of her skin had dimmed to almost nothing. A bad sign, according to the limited information I'd received about astron physiology. Their bioluminescence was directly linked to their vitality. In critical medical cases, they used light amplification to monitor health. "Lyra," I said, keeping my voice gentle, "you need to drink something. Your body is dehydrating." She made a small sound of resistance. "Astron, rehydration." "I don't have astron solutions," I reminded her. "Just water." "Will it help or harm you?" Her eyes opened halfway, regarding me through silvery slits. "Neutral. Won't help. Won't hurt." I retrieved a glass of water from my kitchen unit, then carefully helped her into a semi-sitting position. Even this small movement seemed to cause her pain. Her facial muscles contracted in a grimace that looked disconcertingly human, despite her alien features. She accepted small sips, each swallow visibly difficult. Up close, I could see that the usually smooth skin around her throat had developed a textured pattern, like scales emerging under stress. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "You didn't need to prove anything." "Yes, I did." I stared at her. "Why?" "Because every time you smiled at me for understanding something small, I thought, maybe I could stay." The confession hung in the air between us, weighted with implications I wasn't prepared for. Stay? The exchange program was temporary by design, 6 months maximum for first contact species. Lyra had already completed half her assigned duration. "Stay?" I echoed, uncertain I'd understood correctly. She closed her eyes again, as if the conversation had depleted her limited energy. Not talking about food. She was talking about belonging, about not being sent back when the program ended, about not being left behind. Again. The last word caught me off guard. She hadn't spoken it aloud, yet somehow I knew it completed her thought. Something in her tone, perhaps, or the way her luminescence dimmed further as emotion overtook her. "Have you been left before?" I asked carefully. For several minutes she didn't respond, and I thought she might have drifted into unconsciousness. Then so softly I almost missed it. "All astrons are selected, or rejected." I waited for more, but she seemed unable or unwilling to elaborate. The strain of speaking was clearly taxing her weakened state. "Rest," I urged, gently helping her lie back down. "We can talk when you're stronger." Her hand caught mine with unexpected strength. "Stay," she whispered. "Please." An urgent ping from my communication terminal interrupted the moment. My shift supervisor, wondering why I hadn't reported for duty. I glanced at the time display and realized with a jolt that I was over an hour late. "I have to answer that," I told Lyra, carefully extracting my hand, "or they'll send someone to check on me." Fear flashed across her features. "Don't tell." "I won't," I promised, "but I need a reason to stay here with you." I moved to the terminal and composed a quick message, claiming a stomach virus, common enough on the station to be believable, serious enough to warrant a day of isolation. The supervisor's response came almost immediately. "Confirmed sick leave, 24 hours, medical check required if extending beyond initial period." Relief washed through me, followed quickly by the sobering realization of what I'd just done. Falsifying illness reports was a clear violation of station protocol. If discovered, it could mean a formal reprimand, loss of privileges, even reassignment to a less desirable post. Yet as I looked back at Lyra, curled in my bed, fighting through pain she'd willingly embraced simply to understand something about me, the potential consequences seemed insignificant. I returned to her side, pulling my desk chair closer to the bed. "I'm here," I assured her. "All day." Her eyes remained closed, but the tense lines of her face relaxed slightly. The room fell silent except for the sound of her labored breathing and the constant background hum of the station's life support systems. I studied her alien features, trying to reconcile the formal diplomat I'd first met with the vulnerable being before me now. Who was she really? What did selection mean in Astron culture? And why was she so afraid of returning? As the questions multiplied in my mind, one certainty emerged from the confusion. Whatever had driven Lyra to take such a risk, it went far deeper than simple curiosity about human food. And I was somehow central to her reasons. She stayed in my bed for 3 days. Didn't leave, didn't want to, and I didn't ask her to. I brought her water, helped regulate her body temperature, sat on the floor beside her, and told dumb stories about childhood, just so she'd hear human voices when her stomach twisted. The first full day of Lyra's recovery established patterns that would carry us through the ordeal. I monitored her condition, helped her to the bathroom when necessary, a process complicated by both her weakness and our mutual embarrassment, and maintained a steady stream of one-sided conversation that seemed to comfort her even when she couldn't respond. By midday, I'd done some discreet research on my personal tablet, accessing whatever limited information was available about Astron physiology. Most of it was restricted to medical personnel, but I found enough in the general database to understand what her body was experiencing. Her digestive system was essentially treating the earth food as a toxin, marshaling all available resources to isolate and expel the foreign substances. The process was indeed rarely fatal, but extremely taxing. Under normal circumstances, she would be in an Astron medical facility, receiving specialized care to ease the process. Instead, she was hidden in my quarters, enduring the full brunt of the reaction with only basic support. The gravity of her choice weighed on me more heavily with each labored breath I counted. Around hour 14, she began to speak more, though her words often emerged as fragments between waves of discomfort. "Tell me stories," she requested during a brief period of lucidity. "Your world, your life." So I talked. About growing up in the Seattle Dome, one of the climate-controlled cities that had sprung up after the environmental collapses of the previous century. About my parents. My father, a hydroponic engineer. My mother, a community health coordinator. About my decision to join the Outpost program when Earth became too crowded with memories after my father's death. I told her about my first days on the station, the disorientation of artificial gravity and recycled air. The friendships formed and dissolved as people rotated back to Earth or onward to other assignments. The gradual process of making this metal box in space feel like home. Simple stories, ordinary memories. Nothing that seemed significant enough to capture the attention of an alien diplomat. Yet Lyra listened with the same intensity she brought to everything, as if each mundane detail contained crucial insights. During one particularly bad spell of muscle spasms, I hesitantly placed my hand on her forehead, remembering how my mother used to comfort me during childhood illnesses. To my surprise, her skin felt different than I expected. Not cold like her appearance suggested, but warm and slightly textured, with a subtle vibration beneath the surface. At my touch, the luminescence beneath her skin pulsed briefly brighter, and the tension in her face eased somewhat. "Better?" I asked, uncertain. "Yes," she whispered. "Contact helps modulate nervous system." I kept my hand there, noticing how the glow followed my touch like ripples in water. "Why didn't you tell me that sooner?" A weak smile flickered across her features. "Didn't know. If permitted." "Of course it's permitted," I said, then realized the presumption in my words. Physical contact between species might have protocols I wasn't aware of. "I mean, if it helps you, I'm happy to, whatever you need." Her silver eyes studied me with that penetrating gaze that somehow saw beyond words. Many humans fear difference. The observation caught me off guard with its accuracy. She was right. Despite all our technological advances and expanded presence in space, humanity still struggled with the fundamental challenge of truly accepting the alien, the other. "I'm not afraid of you, Lyra." "No," she agreed softly. "You're curious, like me." Something about the way she said it made me wonder if curiosity might be a rare quality among her people too. A characteristic that set her apart, perhaps even contributed to her selection for the exchange program. As the station's day cycle faded to evening, Lyra's condition stabilized somewhat. The violent physical reactions had subsided to a persistent discomfort, and her skin had regained a hint of its natural luminescence. She drifted in and out of sleep, her body still working overtime to process the incompatible nutrients. I maintained my vigil, catching brief naps in the chair beside the bed, always waking at the slightest change in her breathing or movement. During one of these half-conscious moments, I felt a light touch on my hand. I opened my eyes to find Lyra watching me, her expression more alert than it had been since the ordeal began. "You stay," she observed quietly. "Of course," I replied, as if there had never been any question of doing otherwise. Her fingers tentatively explored mine, mapping the differences between our hands. 5 fingers to her 4, my blunt nails to her slightly pointed ones, the texture and color of our skin. "In my culture," she said, her voice stronger now, "continued proximity during vulnerability is significant." I wasn't sure how to respond. Was she warning me about a cultural misunderstanding? Should I give you more space? "No." The word came quickly, definitive. "I am telling you what this means to me, not what you should do." The distinction was subtle but important. She wasn't imposing her cultural framework on me, just sharing what our situation would signify in her world. "What does it mean to you?" I asked, genuinely curious. Her luminescence pulsed subtly, creating patterns beneath her skin that I'd never seen before. Trust beyond protocol, acceptance of true self, not presented self. The depth of her words resonated somewhere inside me, touching on something I hadn't fully acknowledged until that moment. How much of ourselves, human and astron alike, remained hidden behind the careful performances of our public roles. "I think," I said slowly, "that might mean something similar to humans too." Her lips curved in that distinctly astron smile, slightly asymmetrical, revealing teeth that were uniformly white and slightly pointed. In the dim light of my bedroom, with her silver hair spread across my pillow and her skin glowing softly against my standard issue sheets, she looked both impossibly alien and unexpectedly at home. For the first time since finding her collapsed on my floor, I felt the knot of worry in my chest begin to loosen. She would recover. We would figure out what came next. But as she drifted back to sleep, her hands still resting lightly on mine, one question continued to circle in my mind. What had she meant about staying? And why did the idea of her leaving when the exchange program ended suddenly feel like losing something essential? One night she said, "Your scent is in this blanket." "Yeah, sorry about that. Number, I like it. It tells me I'm somewhere safe." The second day brought noticeable improvement. Lyra's natural luminescence had strengthened, pulsing with more regular patterns beneath her skin. She could sit up without assistance, though prolonged movement still taxed her recovering system. The textured scales around her throat had receded, returning to the smooth silver-toned skin typical of her species. I'd managed to extend my sick leave for another day by sending occasional updates about my worsening condition to the medical unit, careful to include just enough genuine symptoms to sound convincing without triggering an actual medical intervention. As Lyra grew stronger, our conversations deepened. Freed from the worst of the physical distress, she began to fill in the gaps of my understanding about her world and her place within it. Astrons are not born as humans are, she explained as we shared a quiet moment during the station's afternoon cycle. She sat propped against my pillows, wrapped in my blanket despite the regulated temperature of the room. We are grown in calibrated environments, genetically optimized for specific functions. You're engineered, I asked, trying to keep surprise from my voice. Modified with purpose, she corrected gently. Natural reproduction still occurs, but embryos are enhanced according to projected societal needs. I processed this information, realizing it explained certain consistencies I'd noticed in the Astron delegation. Their uniform height, similar physical capabilities, synchronized biological rhythms. So you were designed to be a diplomat? Her luminescence dimmed slightly. I was designed for neuroplasticity and adaptive cognition. The diplomatic assignment came later, after assessment. Assessment? She looked away, silver eyes focusing on the stars visible through my small window. At maturation, all Astrons undergo evaluation. Our actual abilities are measured against our design potential. Those who meet or exceed expectations are selected for appropriate roles. Those who fall short? The hesitation spoke volumes. What happens to them? I prompted gently. Remediation, reassignment to less optimal functions. Some never find placement. The clinical language couldn't disguise the emotional weight behind her words. This wasn't just abstract policy to her. It was personal history, perhaps even current fear. And you, I asked, were you selected or? Provisional selection, she replied, the words precise yet brittle. My cognitive flexibility met parameters, but my emotional regulation did not. The exchange program is my final evaluation phase. Understanding dawned with uncomfortable clarity. The pressure she'd been under during her time at the station wasn't just diplomatic responsibility. It was existential. Her future, her very place in Astron society, hinged on her performance here. That's why you're so afraid of being sent back early, I realized aloud. A protocol violation would mean failing your evaluation. She nodded, luminescence fluctuating with what I now recognized as emotional distress. Correct. But then why risk eating the spaghetti? You knew it was forbidden. Lyra's gaze returned to mine, intense and unblinking. Because the parameters of my evaluation are flawed. They measure only my adherence to protocol, not my success at true understanding. And you think understanding human food would help you understand humans better? Not just food, she said. Connection. You said humans bond through shared consumption. Experience creates comprehension beyond observation. I considered her words, sensing there was more she wasn't saying. Was it worth it? What did you learn from nearly poisoning yourself with my leftovers? For the first time since I'd known her, Lyra looked almost embarrassed. The luminescence beneath her skin formed patterns I hadn't seen before, concentrating around her face in what might have been the Astron equivalent of a blush. I learned that taste is emotional, she said carefully. The experience was not merely chemical, it was contextual, connected to you, to this space, to our interactions. So you tasted what? Friendship? I suggested, trying to understand. More. The word hung between us, laden with unspoken implications. Before I could press further, she shifted beneath the blanket, drawing it closer around her shoulders. As she moved, she inhaled deeply, her expression changing to something I couldn't quite interpret. Your scent is in this blanket, she observed. I felt a flash of self-consciousness. Yeah, sorry about that. Number, I like it. It tells me I'm somewhere safe. The simple statement knocked the air from my lungs. Not because of what she said exactly, but how she said it, with a vulnerability that stripped away the careful diplomat, the engineered Astron, revealing just Lyra, a being far from home, seeking connection and safety in an alien environment. And somehow, against all protocol and probability, she'd found that safety with me, a maintenance technician who'd never even left the solar system before his station assignment. You are, I told her, voice rough with unexpected emotion. Safe here, I mean. Her silver eyes held mine, searching for something. Whatever she found made her luminescence strengthen, pulsing in a rhythm that seemed almost like a physical manifestation of relief. "I know," she said simply. As the station's day cycle once again faded to evening, I realized we'd reached a turning point. The crisis of her physical reaction was passing, but the implications of what had happened, what was happening between us, were just beginning to unfold. For both our sakes, I needed to understand exactly what those implications might be. "Lyra," I asked carefully, "in Astran culture, what does it mean when someone risks harm to understand another person?" Her luminescence pulsed once, brightly, before settling into a steady glow. "It means recognition of value beyond utility, prioritization of connection beyond function." She paused, then added softly, "It is not common among my people." "And is there a word for that? In your language?" "Yes," she replied, "but it has no direct translation in yours." As night settled over the station and Lyra drifted into healing sleep, I remained awake, turning her words over in my mind. Whatever was developing between us existed in the untranslatable spaces between our languages, our cultures, our very biologies, and yet somehow it felt more authentic than anything I'd experienced in years. Eventually she got better. Color returned. She stood on her own again. I offered to take her back to her ship to rest there. She refused. "I'll stay, just not in the bed." "Why not?" "Because I might not leave it again." We both laughed, but not too hard, because we both knew she meant it. The third day marked a significant turning point in Lyra's recovery. I woke from an uncomfortable nap in my chair to find her sitting on the edge of the bed, experimentally testing her strength by shifting her weight from side to side. "You should have woken me," I said, rubbing my stiff neck. "You required rest," she stated matter-of-factly. "Your biological rhythms were disrupted by maintaining vigilance." I smiled despite my discomfort. Even weakened, she retained that distinctly Astron way of making ordinary human needs sound like fascinating scientific phenomena. "How are you feeling?" I asked, moving to sit beside her on the bed. "Functional," she replied, then corrected herself with a small smile. "Better. The worst has passed." Her skin had regained most of its natural luminescence, though the light still pulsed slightly irregularly, evidence that her system hadn't fully recovered. Her silver hair, usually immaculately groomed, hung in slight disarray around her face, making her look younger somehow, more vulnerable. "You should eat something," I suggested. "Your own food, I mean. Do you have nutrient gel in your quarters?" She nodded. "Yes, but retrieving it requires returning to diplomatic housing." The unspoken question hung between us. Was she ready to leave the safety of my apartment and face potential discovery? Her unauthorized absence had now stretched to 3 days. Even with the relative autonomy granted to diplomatic personnel, questions were likely being asked. "I could go for you," I offered, "if you tell me how to access your quarters." Lyra considered this, then shook her head. "Security protocols would flag unauthorized entry, and your extended absence from duty has likely already raised questions." She was right. Despite my carefully crafted excuses, staying sick for 3 days straight was pushing the limits of believability. Sooner or later, someone would come checking, either a concerned colleague or a suspicious supervisor. "Then we need a plan," I said. "A way to get you back to your quarters without anyone realizing what happened." "The maintenance passages," Lyra suggested. "They connect all sections of the station, correct?" I nodded, impressed by her strategic thinking, despite her weakened state. "Yes, I have access codes for the entire network. We could avoid main corridors entirely." She attempted to stand, wobbling slightly before I caught her elbow to steady her. "I should go now, while movement between quarters is minimal." "Are you sure you're strong enough?" I couldn't keep the concern from my voice. Lyra straightened, her expression determined despite the evident effort it cost her. "I must be." Reluctantly, I helped her prepare for the journey. She smoothed her rumpled clothing, the same outfit she'd worn 3 days ago when she'd collapsed by my bed. I found a maintenance jumpsuit that might plausibly fit over her slender frame, offering some disguise if we were spotted by security cameras. As she donned the oversized garment, I realized with a pang how much I'd grown accustomed to her presence in my space. The quiet observation, the thoughtful questions, the gentle glow of her skin in the darkness. The prospect of returning to my normal solitary routine felt suddenly hollow. "I need to report to my duty shift tomorrow," I told her, as I checked the maintenance route on my tablet. "They won't believe I'm sick any longer without medical verification." "Yes," she agreed. "We must resume normal patterns to avoid further scrutiny." Normal patterns. The phrase hung in the air, raising the unspoken question of what normal might mean for us after everything that had happened. Once she was ready, I led her to the hidden access panel in my bathroom, a standard feature in all station quarters, though rarely used by non-maintenance personnel. The narrow passageway beyond was dimly lit with emergency lighting, designed for utility rather than comfort. "It's about 20 minutes to the diplomatic quarter through these passages," I explained as I helped her through the opening. "Are you sure you can make it?" Lyra nodded, though I noticed her luminescence dim slightly with the effort of standing in the confined space. "I must." We navigated the maintenance tunnels in silence, moving slowly to accommodate her limited strength. Twice we had to pause for her to rest, pressing ourselves against the wall as automated service drones hummed past on routine inspections. The journey took nearly 40 minutes instead of the estimated 20, but eventually we reached the access point nearest to her assigned quarters. I peered through the small visibility port, checking for station personnel in the corridor beyond. "Clear," I whispered, entering my override code to unlock the panel. Lyra removed the borrowed jumpsuit, once again appearing as the dignified diplomatic envoy rather than a fugitive patient. Only the slight dimness of her luminescence and the fatigue around her silver eyes betrayed her ordeal. "Thank you," she said formally as she prepared to exit the passage, "for your assistance during my indisposition." The sudden return to diplomatic language felt like a wall slamming down between us. After 3 days of intimate care and vulnerable conversations, the shift jarred me more than I would have expected. "Lyra," I said, catching her wrist gently before she could leave, "will I see you again?" The question came out more desperate than I'd intended, revealing feelings I hadn't fully acknowledged even to myself. Her luminescence pulsed once, brightly, as her gaze met mine. For a moment, the formal facade cracked, showing the Lyra I'd come to know in the privacy of my quarters. "I'll stay," she said softly, "just not in the bed." "Why not?" The question escaped before I could consider its implications. A smile flickered across her features, not the measured diplomatic expression, but something genuine and slightly mischievous. "Because I might not leave it again." We both laughed, but not too hard, because we both knew she meant it. The corridor beyond remained empty as Lyra slipped out of the maintenance passage, straightening her posture into the perfect diplomat once more. I watched through the small port as she moved gracefully toward her quarters, no outward sign betraying the ordeal of the past 3 days. Only when she had safely disappeared from view did I begin the long journey back through the maintenance tunnels to my own empty apartment. A week later, she was back to full health. She sat on my windowsill, sipping cold tea with a spoon like she was learning emotions from the temperature. Then she said something I didn't expect. "I still don't know what Earth tastes like." "That's probably for the best," I joked. "It almost killed you." "No," she said. "I mean, I don't know what you taste like. Not your food? You." "What?" "Your kindness, your guilt, your fear. I consumed your world and couldn't digest it, but I still want to learn." That moment, I couldn't breathe, because I realized she wasn't trying to be human anymore. She was trying to be close. Returning to normal station routine after Lyra's ordeal proved more challenging than I'd anticipated. My body went through the motions, repairing environmental systems, updating maintenance logs, exchanging casual conversation with colleagues. But my mind remained in my quarters, replaying moments of connection that defied the careful boundaries established by the exchange program. For 3 days, I saw no sign of Lyra. The diplomatic delegation maintained their usual schedule of meetings and cultural exchanges, but she appeared to have been temporarily removed from public functions. I checked the official station bulletins obsessively, fearing an announcement of her early return to Astra due to health concerns or protocol violations. None came. On the 4th day, as I finished a routine repair in the agricultural sector, my communication terminal pinged with an unexpected message. Environmental assessment requested in Residential Unit 5-17. Priority, non-urgent. My unit, my apartment. Heart racing, I completed my current task with barely concealed impatience, then headed directly to level 5. The door to my quarters slid open to reveal Lyra sitting calmly on my couch, as if the past week had never happened. Except everything had changed. Her posture was more relaxed than I'd ever seen it in our earlier interactions. Her luminescence pulsed with steady, confident patterns. And most strikingly, she held a mug of steaming liquid in her hands, not the nutrient solution Astrans typically consumed, but what appeared to be. "Is that tea?" I asked incredulously. She lifted the mug slightly. Herbal infusion. No nutritional value to trigger digestive response. Only aromatic compounds for sensory experience. I approached cautiously, still processing her unexpected presence. Are you allowed to be here? I submitted formal request for continued cultural observation in non-official context, she replied, sipping delicately from the mug. Approved by both Earth and Astron supervisors. You got permission to keep visiting me? A subtle pulse of increased luminescence, what I was beginning to recognize as her version of amusement. Not you specifically, human living environments generally. She paused, then added more softly. The specific human was left to my discretion. The implications warmed me more than I cared to admit. And you chose me again. Logical continuation of established research parameters, she stated, though the increased rhythm of her skin's glow belied the clinical explanation. I settled beside her on the couch, close but not touching, respecting the public persona she needed to maintain now that we were back within official protocols. How are you feeling? Really? Recovered, she replied. My system has eliminated all foreign substances. And your evaluation? Has the incident affected your standing? Her expression shifted subtly. Unknown. My supervisors noted my 3-day absence, but accepted my explanation of focused meditation practice, a common Astran recalibration technique. So you lied to them. I selectively presented information, she corrected carefully. Direct falsehood would be detected in our neural synchronization sessions. The casual reference to neural synchronization caught my attention. Your people can read each other's minds. Not thoughts precisely, she explained. Emotional patterns, experiential imprints, surface intentions. She hesitated, then added, it makes deception difficult between Astrons. Is that happening now? Are they monitoring you? She shook her head. Synchronization requires physical proximity and mutual consent. My next scheduled session is not for 14 station days. The revelation that she had a 2-week window of relative privacy shifted something in the atmosphere between us. Without the immediate threat of discovery, the rigid formality she'd adopted upon entering the room began to soften. Over the next 7 days, Lyra's visits resumed their previous pattern with one significant difference, a new depth of honesty between us. The diplomatic veneer she'd maintained during early interactions had been permanently thinned by our shared experience, revealing more of her true self with each conversation. A week after her return to my quarters, I found her perched on my windowsill during evening cycle, watching the gas giant that dominated our view. She balanced a mug of cold tea on her knee, occasionally sampling it with a spoon rather than drinking directly, a curious habit I'd noticed but never questioned. Why do you do that? I finally asked. The thing with the spoon? She considered the utensil thoughtfully. Temperature affects perception. Small quantities allow more precise analysis of changing sensory input. You're tasting the temperature gradient? Learning the relationship between thermal change and flavor perception, she clarified. Humans experience this naturally. Astrons must learn it specifically. I smiled, charmed by her methodical approach to such a simple pleasure. And what have you learned so far? That sensory experience is contextual, she replied. The same substance presents differently depending on temperature, environment, emotional state. She paused, then added, and company. The last observation hung between us, loaded with meaning beyond the simple words. For several moments, we sat in comfortable silence, watching the slow dance of distant stars beyond the window. Then she said something I didn't expect. I still don't know what Earth tastes like. That's probably for the best, I joked. It almost killed you. No, she said. I mean, I don't know what you taste like. Not your food. You. What? Your kindness, your guilt, your fear. I consumed your world and couldn't digest it, but I still want to learn. That moment, I couldn't breathe because I realized she wasn't trying to be human anymore. She was trying to be close. The revelation struck me with physical force, a tightening in my chest, a rushing in my ears. All this time, I'd been interpreting her curiosity as anthropological interest, her questions as data collection for her diplomatic reports. But the truth was simultaneously simpler and more profound. She was seeking connection, not information. There are other ways to understand, I said carefully, my voice not quite steady, ways that don't involve risking your health. Her luminescence pulsed in that now familiar pattern of increased emotional intensity. Yes, she agreed, but they require mutual vulnerability. I'm not sure what that means, I admitted. Lyra set aside her tea, turning to face me fully. In my culture, understanding comes through synchronization, the direct sharing of experiential patterns between minds. You mentioned that's not possible between our species, I reminded her. Neural synchronization is not, she agreed, but emotional synchronization, perhaps. How? She hesitated, luminescence fluctuating with what I now recognized as uncertainty. Through sustained proximity, shared experiences, voluntary vulnerability. Her silver eyes held mine. Through choosing to remain when protocol would suggest departure? The words resonated with something fundamental within me, a recognition of the choice we both faced. Station regulations, cultural differences, biological incompatibilities, all suggested we maintain professional distance. Yet here we were, deliberately stepping closer to something neither of our peoples had fully explored before. I want to understand you too, I confessed, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable. Not just as an Astron, as Lyra. Her luminescence brightened visibly, patterns shifting beneath her skin in what I hoped was positive response. Then we continue, beyond protocol, beyond observation. Into what? I asked. Her smile held a complexity I was only beginning to comprehend. Into the untranslatable. Now she still visits me, still sits too close on the couch, still asks questions that twist my chest in ways I can't explain, but she doesn't eat my food anymore. She just steals my pillow, sleeps in my bed when I'm gone, and calls it her own when no one's around to hear. In the weeks that followed our mutual decision to explore the untranslatable, Lyra and I established new patterns of interaction, less defined by the formal structures of the exchange program and more by our growing understanding of each other's needs and boundaries. She continued her official duties with the diplomatic delegation, participating in scheduled events and submitting the required cultural observation reports. I maintained my maintenance routines, fixing environmental systems, and responding to repair tickets across the station. To outside observers, nothing had changed, but in the private sanctuary of my quarters, everything was different. Lyra no longer perched formally on the edge of furniture or maintained careful distance. She sprawled across my couch, legs tucked beneath her in a posture I'd never seen her use in public. She examined my belongings not with clinical observation, but with personal interest, asking about the stories behind objects rather than their functions. And most significantly, she began to share herself, not the carefully constructed diplomatic envoy, but the actual Lyra beneath the performance. My designation isn't actually Lyra, she admitted one evening as we shared the narrow space of my kitchen, her watching as I prepared a simple meal for myself. It's an approximation created for human pronunciation. What's your real name? I asked, curious. She made a sound unlike anything I'd heard from her before, a melodic sequence of tones that seemed to resonate from somewhere other than her vocal cords, creating harmonics that made the air itself vibrate subtly. That's beautiful, I said when the sound faded, but I definitely can't pronounce it. Her luminescence pulsed with amusement, hence Lyra. Close enough in tonal structure to be recognizable to me, simple enough for human speech apparatus. Do you mind that we can't say your real name? She considered this, head tilted in that characteristic way. Names are functional identifiers. What matters is recognition of the being behind the designation. And do you feel recognized? Here, the question came out more vulnerable than I'd intended. Her silver eyes met mine directly. By you? Yes. The simple affirmation warmed something deep within me. In a station full of diplomatic personnel trained in cross-cultural communication, somehow I, a maintenance technician with no special qualifications, had managed to see beyond the alien diplomat to the person beneath. As our comfort with each other grew, so did the blurring of boundaries between our separate lives. Lyra began leaving small Astron objects in my quarters, a crystalline structure that emitted subtle harmonics when touched, a fabric sample with properties that change based on proximity to different energy sources, a small container of scented compound that reminded her of her homeworld. I found myself making space for these alien artifacts among my own possessions, the visual integration reflecting our personal one. The most significant boundary shift occurred approximately 1 month after her recovery. I returned from a double shift repairing a major atmospheric recycling unit to find Lyra asleep in my bed. Not just sitting on it, as she sometimes did while waiting for me, but fully asleep, curled on her side, silver hair spread across my pillow, luminescence pulsing with the slow rhythm of Astron sleep patterns. I froze in the doorway, unsure how to proceed. Wake her? Leave her be? The diplomatic protocols that had been so thoroughly drilled into all station personnel were explicit. Private quarters were culturally sensitive spaces. Boundaries must be respected. Yet here she was, having crossed that boundary in the most intimate way possible. As I stood there deliberating, her luminescence shifted, patterns indicating a return to consciousness. Her silver eyes opened, focusing immediately on me with that uncanny Astran awareness. "You've returned," she stated, making no move to rise from the bed. "Yes," I replied, still uncertain. "You're in my bed." "Yes." No apology, no explanation. I shifted awkwardly. "Is there a reason?" She sat up slowly, the blanket falling away to reveal she was still fully clothed in her diplomatic attire. "Your scent, the texture of your sleeping surface, the ambient sounds of your living space." She paused, then added simply, "They provide comfort." "Comfort," I repeated, the concept reminding me of our very first conversation in the hallway weeks ago. "I thought Astrans prioritized functionality over comfort." "Astrans are encouraged to prioritize function," she corrected. "Individual variation exists. And you vary." Her luminescence dimmed slightly. "Hence my provisional status. My preference for experiential satisfaction over optimal efficiency has been noted in evaluations." The admission carried weight, another piece of the puzzle that was Lyra. Not just any Astran diplomat, but one whose natural inclinations pushed against her culture's expectations. Like me, in my own way, a maintenance worker who collected broken parts for their beauty rather than their utility. "You could have asked," I said, though there was no real annoyance in my tone. "Before claiming my bed, would you have refused?" The directness of the question made me smile despite myself. Probably not." "Then the question was functionally unnecessary," she concluded with impeccable Astran logic. I laughed, tension dissolving. "Just maybe let me know next time, so I don't think someone broke into my quarters." "Acceptable compromise," she agreed, rising from the bed with fluid grace. "I will notify you of future occupation intentions." And she did in her way, not asking permission exactly, but establishing patterns I could anticipate. She never stayed overnight when I was present, respecting that boundary without discussion. But when my shifts ran long or overlapped with her free periods, I would often return to find evidence of her presence. A slightly displaced pillow, the lingering atmospheric trace of her species' subtle biochemistry, occasionally a small Astran artifact left deliberately on my bed like a calling card. Now she still visits me, still sits too close on the couch, still asks questions that twist my chest in ways I can't explain. But she doesn't eat my food anymore. She just steals my pillow, sleeps in my bed when I'm gone, and calls it her own when no one's around to hear. The arrangement should have felt intrusive, perhaps even unsettling. Instead, it generated a curious comfort, knowing that in my absence, my space served as sanctuary for her, that the bed where I sought rest became, for her, a place of belonging. "Does it violate your protocols?" I asked one evening, addressing the unspoken question that hung between us. Whatever this is between us. Lyra considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. The exchange program guidelines specify appropriate observation parameters and interaction limitations. They do not explicitly prohibit personal affinity development. "Is that what we're calling it? Personal affinity development?" Her luminescence pulsed in that pattern I now recognize as amusement. "The untranslatable requires inexact terminology. I think humans just call it friendship," I suggested. "Or maybe something else." Her silver eyes studied me with that penetrating gaze that always made me feel simultaneously exposed and accepted. "Your species has many classifications for interpersonal connection. Which designation applies here?" It was a fair question, and one I wasn't entirely sure how to answer. The relationship developing between us existed in uncharted territory, beyond the familiar categories of human social bonds. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe we don't need to name it yet." She nodded, apparently satisfied with the ambiguity. "Names are functional identifiers. What matters is recognition of the connection itself." And I let her. Because somewhere between the plate and the pain, she decided my bed was where she felt real. And somewhere between the joke and the silence, I did too. And I let her, because somewhere between the plate and the pain, she decided my bed was where she felt real. And somewhere between the joke and the silence, I did too. 2 months after Lyra's spaghetti incident, an official notification appeared on all station terminals. The Astron delegation would conclude their exchange program in 30 days, returning to their homeworld for evaluation and debriefing. Standard procedure, expected and planned for since the beginning. Yet the announcement hit me with unexpected force, a hollow feeling spreading through my chest as I stared at the scrolling text on my maintenance terminal. 30 days. After that, Lyra would leave, return to Astra for her final evaluation, her future determined by how well she had fulfilled her diplomatic mission. I found myself counting backward. How long since she first appeared in that hallway, watching me repair a fan? How many evenings spent in quiet conversation in my quarters? How many boundaries crossed, protocols bent, expectations defied? Not enough. Nowhere near enough. That evening I waited in my apartment, wondering if she would appear as usual, or if the announcement had changed things between us. When the door slid open to admit her slender form, relief washed through me with surprising intensity. "You saw the notification," she stated, studying my expression with those perceptive silver eyes. "Yes." No point pretending otherwise. 30 days. She moved to her usual place on my couch, closer to my side than she sat in those early formal visits. Her luminescence pulsed with patterns I'd come to associate with complex emotional states. "The exchange conclusion has always been scheduled," she said carefully. "This is not unexpected." "I know." I tried to keep my tone neutral. "It's just sooner than I realized." Lyra was silent for several moments, her gaze focused on the space between us. When she finally spoke, her voice carried an unusual hesitancy. "On Astra, my evaluation will determine my permanent assignment. If I meet all parameters, I will receive official diplomatic designation. Full selection." "That's good, right?" "What you've been working toward." She nodded, but her luminescence dimmed subtly. "Optimal outcome by Astron standards." The qualification hung in the air between us. But optimal by Astron standards may not align with personal preference. The admission was significant, perhaps the most direct acknowledgement she'd made of the conflict between her cultural expectations and her individual desires. "What would align with personal preference?" I asked, heart rate increasing despite my attempt at casualness. Lyra's luminescence fluctuated rapidly, indicating emotional intensity beyond what she typically displayed. "Continuation," she said simply, "of the exchange program. Of this." Her gesture encompassed the space between us, the apartment, the entire context of our unusual connection. Of experiencing existence without constant evaluation. Of being recognized rather than assessed. The vulnerability in her words tightened something in my chest. Without conscious thought, I reached for her hand, a gesture that had become natural between us in private moments, her 4 fingers interlaced with my 5. The anatomical differences that once seemed so alien, now simply part of her familiar presence. "I want that too," I admitted softly. Her luminescence brightened visibly. "Then we must consider possibilities." "What possibilities exist?" The practical question couldn't be avoided. "Your people expect you to return. Mine expect me to stay at my post." "Expectations can be negotiated," she suggested. "The exchange program is a precedent. Other arrangements might be proposed." Hope flickered cautiously. "What kind of arrangements?" "Extended cultural immersion, technical consulting for Astron environmental systems, educational exchange." She paused, then added, "or personal application for Earth residency." The last option caught me off guard. "You would stay? Permanently?" "If permitted," she qualified. "Many bureaucratic obstacles exist, but precedent exists for diplomatic personnel transitioning to residential status." My mind raced through the implications. Lyra, not as a temporary visitor, but as a permanent resident of the station. Our unusual connection not compressed into a few months, but allowed to develop naturally, without the pressure of an impending departure. "Would your people allow it?" I asked. "Given your evaluation situation?" Her expression grew more serious. "Uncertain. My performance metrics are complex. Some parameters have been exceeded. Others," she hesitated. "The incident with the Earth food would be considered a significant protocol breach if discovered." "They don't know about that." "My neural synchronization sessions have been carefully managed," she admitted. "Certain experiences can be compartmentalized with sufficient preparation." "You've been hiding things during your mind-reading sessions," I translated, impressed despite my concern. "Isn't that risky?" "Very," she acknowledged, "but necessary for personal authenticity." I squeezed her hand gently. I don't want you to risk your standing, your future. Her silver eyes met mine directly. What future has meaning without choice? Without connection? The question resonated deeply, echoing thoughts I'd had during my own journey to this distant outpost. Hadn't I left Earth seeking something similar? A place where I could define myself beyond expectations, find connections that felt genuine rather than prescribed? We have 30 days, I said, making a decision. Let's use them to figure this out. Together. Her luminescence pulsed with what I now recognized as determination. Yes, optimal approach. The 30 days that followed became the most intense period of my life on the station. During official hours, we maintained our professional roles, Lyra attending diplomatic functions, me repairing environmental systems. But every free moment was dedicated to our shared mission, finding a way for her to stay. We researched precedents in the Earth-Astra diplomatic archives, identifying previous cases where exchange participants had extended their assignments. We consulted station regulations regarding residential applications for non-Earth species. We even cautiously approached sympathetic members of both the Earth and Astran administrative staff, testing reactions to hypothetical scenarios. Some paths closed quickly, others showed promise but required additional advocacy. Through it all, we were careful to frame our inquiries in terms of cultural exchange, benefits, and technical cooperation, never revealing the personal motivation driving our search. As the days counted down, our evenings in my quarters took on a bittersweet quality. Each conversation, each shared silence, each moment of connection was simultaneously more precious and more painful, with the uncertain future looming before us. If I cannot stay, Lyra said one night, 7 days before the scheduled departure, will you continue without me? Continue what? I asked, though I understood her meaning. Living, finding satisfaction in small experiences, creating belonging in this place. The question revealed her deeper concern, not just leaving me, but leaving me diminished, returning to the solitary existence she had interrupted. I existed before you arrived, I reminded her gently. I'll exist after you leave, if it comes to that. Existence is not continuation, she countered, not as I mean it. I considered her words, recognizing the weight behind them. I will carry what we've shared, I promised. It won't disappear just because you do. Her luminescence pulsed with complex patterns, gratitude, sorrow, something deeper I couldn't quite name. Without words, she moved closer on the couch, leaning her head against my shoulder in a gesture she had adopted from observing human couples on the station. We sat like that for a long time, the silence between us filled with everything we weren't saying. Outside my small window, the eternal night of space stretched endlessly, punctuated by distant stars and the slow rotation of the gas giant we orbited. 3 days before the scheduled departure, everything changed. I returned from my shift to find Lyra in my quarters, her luminescence pulsing with unusual intensity. Before I could speak, she approached me with purpose, silver eyes wide with what looked like excitement. A possibility exists, she announced without preamble, an unexpected one. For staying? Hope flared despite my attempt to remain measured. Not exactly. She held out a small crystalline device, Astran technology I'd never seen before. For continuation of a different kind, she explained rapidly, her usual measured speech accelerated by enthusiasm. The Astran delegation had received a priority communication from their homeworld, an unprecedented opportunity for Earth-Astran cooperation. A new outpost was being established on the far side of the galaxy, a joint scientific and diplomatic mission requiring personnel from both worlds. They seek humans with environmental systems expertise, she concluded, and Astrans with demonstrated adaptive capability in cross-cultural contexts. The implication struck me with physical force. You and me, together, at a new outpost. Her luminescence brightened to near-blinding intensity. If we apply as a specialized team, citing our established working relationship, approval probability increases significantly. Working relationship, I repeated, a smile forming, despite the overwhelming nature of the proposal. Is that what we're calling it? For official purposes, she clarified, her own expression reflecting my smile in her alien way. The untranslatable requires strategic terminology in bureaucratic contexts. I took a moment to process the magnitude of what she was suggesting. Leaving the station, traveling to the far side of the galaxy, beginning again in an entirely new context, but together, officially, openly, with purpose. The assignment duration would be minimum 3 Earth years, she added, with potential for extension. 3 years, I echoed, the time frame simultaneously daunting and thrilling. A lot can happen in 3 years. Yes, she agreed, silver eyes holding mine with that penetrating gaze that had captivated me from our first meeting. Much can be discovered, much can be translated. The decision should have required days of consideration, careful weighing of options, practical assessment of implications. Instead, it crystallized in an instant of perfect clarity. Let's apply, I said, together. Her luminescence pulsed with joy so intense it seemed to illuminate the entire room. Without words, she stepped forward, closing the remaining distance between us. Her arms encircled me in an embrace she had observed but never attempted before. Another boundary crossed, another human gesture adopted and made her own. I held her close, feeling the subtle vibration of her luminescence against my chest. In that moment, all the differences between us, biological, cultural, experiential, seemed simultaneously significant and irrelevant. What mattered was not the categories that separated us, but the connection that had formed despite them. 3 weeks later, as our transport vessel departed Outpost 37, bound for Earth, and then onward to the far reaches of explored space, I watched the station recede through the observation port. The place that had been my home for years grew smaller against the vastness of space, eventually becoming just another point of light among countless others. Beside me, Lyra observed the same view, her luminescence pulsing with the calm rhythm I had come to associate with her contentment. "Do you miss it already?" she asked, echoing a question I had once tried to explain to her. I considered the hollow feeling that typically accompanied departures, the sense of leaving something valuable behind. To my surprise, it was absent, replaced by an anticipation for what lay ahead. "No," I realized aloud, "because I'm not leaving anything essential behind." Her hand found mine, 4 fingers interlacing with 5 with practiced familiarity. "Because belonging travels with us," she suggested. "Yes," I agreed, recognizing the truth in her words. "Exactly that." And I let her, because somewhere between the plate and the pain, she decided my bed was where she felt real. And somewhere between the joke and the silence, I did too. In the vastness of space, aboard a vessel bound for unknown challenges and discoveries, we carried with us the most significant discovery we had already made. That belonging isn't found in places or protocols or even shared biology. It's found in recognition, in acceptance, in the willingness to risk discomfort for understanding, and sometimes, just sometimes, in a plate of forbidden spaghetti and the unexpected journey it begins.